Greetings, mortals. It is I, Remortis. And today, I'm bringing you more Barbarian builds for Baldur's Gate 3. These builds are intended to provide guidance or inspiration for your own builds, because at the end of the day, the choice is yours. There's no right or wrong way to play this. These are just some of my ideas. And each build I'm bringing you today will have a few flavor options and multi-class optimization options. Let's get right into it, shall we? Starting with arguably the most powerful Barbarian subclass, and in my opinion, one of the most boring ones too, is the Wildheart Barbarian, also known as the Path of the Totem Warrior from D&D 5th edition. When you choose this subclass, you'll be granted the Speak with Animals spell for free, and the option to choose between 5 different animal aspects, known as animal hearts. The Bear Heart, which will grant you, while you're raging, resistance to all forms of damage, not just physical, except psychic damage, which may be relevant in this campaign. It also grants you Unrelenting Ferocity, which you can use to heal on each of your turns as an action. And from my understanding, there's no limit on this as long as you're raging and in combat, at least currently in the EA. This may change in the full launch, but keep in mind this takes an action to use, and you need to attack something or be attacked to maintain your rage, so be cautious when you're doing that. The Eagle, which while raging, will grant you a Diving Strike, a jump attack that knocks your enemies prone, but can only be used when you're above them. There is a lot of verticality in this game, so you'll be able to use it quite often. You can also use dash as a bonus action, much like a rogue's cunning action. The Elk will increase your movement speed and grant you the Primal Stampede ability while you're raging, which is a charge attack that can knock everything in your path prone. The Tiger will increase your jump distance and give you Tiger's Bloodlust, a 3-target cleave that will apply bleed damage, which can only be used while raging. And the Wolf, which will grant advantage to all your allies against any target within 2 meters from you, allow you to use the Inciting Howl while raging, which increases your allies' movement speed. A lot of these effects are interesting and may have their merits, but if we're honest here, there's really only one option. The Bear Heart. Having resistance to everything aside from psychic damage is incredibly powerful in its own right. Top it off with tons of free healing makes your durable Barbarian even harder to kill. I appreciate that Larian added all these extra attacks for the different animal types, but you can only change your animal hearts every time you level up. If you were able to swap it on a long or short rest, that would make these other heart options more viable. But otherwise, most optimizers will just be using the Bear Heart because it's just so strong. At level 6, we gain a magical benefit based on the heart of our choice. It could be the same animal we chose at level 3 or choose a different one. I'm curious to see how Larian will implement or add anything to these effects, but as per 5th edition, you can choose the following. Bear for double carrying capacity and giving you advantage on strength checks to push, pull, lift, or break objects. Eagle will grant you better vision and reduce your penalties from dim light. However, I'm not sure how that will translate to Baldur's Gate 3. The Elk will double your travel speed for you and your allies, and I'm also curious to see how this is going to be. Will it make us move double speed out of combat? Will it be just when we're traveling from different maps? I guess we'll find out. The Tiger allows you to get a few more skill proficiencies, and the Wolf will allow you to track other creatures and move stealthily at faster paces. Not sure how this one will play out in the game either. With the Wildheart Barbarian, depending on your build, you may wish to stay here until level 4 for the stat boost or feat option, or perhaps you want to stay here to level 5 for the extra attack, and then branch off into multiclassing. Since the Wildheart already oozes with flavor of the Druid nature, pun fully intended, an obvious choice would be to go Druid. More specifically, we'll go with the Moon Druid, which will grant stronger wild shape options. Typically, as a Barbarian, you'll want to increase your physical ability scores such as Strength, Constitution, and Dexterity. As a Druid Shapeshifter, you don't care about any of those stats because your wild shapes will replace them. And while raging, we can't cast spells, so our mind stats won't be that important either to a Barbarian. Because of that fact that this combination doesn't care about stats makes the Barbarian put into a strong position since stats don't matter, and since we're limited to stats with point buy anyways, this will be a strong build no matter what you do. However, there will be situations outside of combat where we could use some healing or utility spells, so we might want to invest a little bit into mind stats, or whatever stats you want to use for skill proficiencies. Keep in mind though, we need at least a minimum of 13 strength and 13 wisdom for multi-class requirements. A sample spread would be 14 strength, 12 to 14 dexterity, 12 to 14 constitution, 10 to 12 intelligence, 15 or higher wisdom, and 8 to 10 charisma, depending on your race choice, of course. There are so many synergies for this multi-class. Not only can you become a big hulking bear, you can become an angry bear thanks to your barbarian range. And when combined with the Bearheart, each of your wild shape forms effectively have double HP. And with unrelenting ferocity and combat wild shape, you'll have plenty of ways to keep your wild shapes healthy. Or you can choose to let your form run its course and shapeshift again. The Barbarian's Unarmored Defense will also apply here, using the stats from your wild shapes to further enhance their AC possibilities, especially when you get to higher levels with stronger forms. Speaking of forms, the Moon Druid gets access to their own unique forms. Starting at level 2, you'll get immediate access to the Polar Bear, which is pretty sturdy, has quite a decent amount of health, and can pack a punch. And can take a punch too. At level 4, you get the ability to turn into a Dire Raven, and I believe it's an Auroch or some kind of elk-type creature. But speaking of that, most of these animal forms that you can shapeshift into also share abilities that the Wildheart equivalents have. So your wolf form will have that wolf howl that the Wildheart would give. The elk form that we get has that elk stampede, for example, which is another reason to invest in the Bearheart. You'll be able to get this build online as soon as level 3, with 2 levels of Moon Druid and 1 level of Barbarian. At level 5, you could be 3 levels of Wildheart Barbarian and 2 Moon Druid. But at Moon Druid level 6, that's when you get your next power spike, as you get access to challenge rating 2 wild shapes, which just means we have access to bigger monsters. I don't know what Larian has in store for us, but I'm willing to bet there will be some pretty sweet options. My guess is that there will be a giant snake form, or something similar to that. Ideally, the build will have 4 levels of Barbarian and 8 levels of Druid. Or if you prefer, you can go 3 levels in Barbarian and 9 in Druid, if you don't care about the extra ASI or feat, and you prefer the level 9 Druid feature. The Barbarian is already quite flavorful, being a true protector of the wilds. For race options, there are plenty that fit here. The Half-Orc is a very strong contender, since Savage Strikes and Relentless Endurance were already fantastic for the Barbarian, which carries over to the Druid as well. Relentless Endurance will also work while you're in your wild shape forms, meaning that you can withstand another attack and retain your form. You will not drop to 0, you'll just stay at 1, at least till the next attack. Halfling is also a nice contender, since it provides a lucky feat allowing you to reroll any ones. And of course, any flavor of elf will be very flavorful as well. This is probably going to be one of the stronger multi-class options that you'll see on the forums or whatever videos or posts. Mostly due to the fact that, again, this is a point buy game, and this build doesn't care about point buy. And it's incredibly durable. Only time will tell to see which builds people will prefer. Anyhow, we'll move on to the Wild Magic Barbarian, and this subclass can be a bit chaotic. But that makes sense given that the subclass is heavily influenced by the Feywild and other realms of supernatural power. These barbarians feel an awareness for magic, being able to sense the location of magic items and what schools of magic a spell comes from when cast. And when they rage, duck for cover, because 1 to 8 effects will occur randomly, or more if Larian will add some, which can be from giving the barbarian the ability to teleport as a bonus action, or cause pixies to appear and explode, or even shoot a giant laser beam out of its chest. Each of these effects are more or less beneficial to the barbarian and their allies, and gives a bit of randomness or fun to your gameplay when you rage. It's not nearly as detrimental to your party as the Wild Magic Sorcerer. At level 6, Wild Magic Barbarians can grant a bonus to attack rolls or ability checks for 10 minutes. Or they can restore a spell slot to themselves or an ally. The Wild Magic Barbarian is a pretty straightforward subclass, but their randomness can be quite fun, while others may find the unreliableness to be a bit tedious. But the fact that you can restore yourself or your friend's spell slots can have some interesting multi-class options. For builds, I have 2 for you. One being the BarDbarian, and the other we'll get into later. The Barbarian is already strong in battle, but lacks utility outside of combat. The Bard, on the other hand, is pretty solid in battle, but truly shines outside of it. Put these two together, and they make up for each other's shortcomings. Even though the Bard is a caster, you could cast spells before and out of combat, since you can't cast or concentrate on anything while you're raging. But one of the main features of the Bard is their Bardic Inspiration, which can buff an ally for a bonus on their future ability checks, attack rolls, or saving throws. And these can be used while you're raging, since it's not a spell. And you can use your bolstering magic to replenish a spell slot if you need it. Perhaps an extra healing spell, for example. As for which subclass of the Bard you should use, we actually have 2 options available to us, and they're both very similar. One is the Valor Bard, and the other is the Swords Bard. It's really dependent on what you prefer. Both can be interchangeable and won't entirely make or break this subclass combo. Valor will give your inspirations the ability to add their bonus to armor class as well, whereas swords will let you expend your inspirations for some neat flourishing attacks, which can modify your attacks. This build would perform much better if this wasn't point buy, since we need a lot of ability scores, or multi-ability dependent, also known as MAD. So you might have seen some guides that talk about MAD and SAD. This build relies on multiple ability points. And because we're limited on stats, we may want to consider being a half-elf, which will let us bump up a total of 4 stats. Here's a possible balanced stat line we could use for the build. With 16 strength, 14 dexterity, 14 constitution, 10 intellect, 8 wisdom, and 14 charisma. Or we can sacrifice 2 points of our dexterity to increase our charisma by 2 more points. You can also switch intelligence and wisdom if you prefer to have wisdom saving throws, not be in the negative. Not only does this half-elf give us some help with our limited stats, but they also make sense thematically, since elves are typically involved with the Feywild in some form or fashion. And we can flavor it further by picking what type of elf we are. If we want to go with Wood Elf, we'll get a free proficiency in stealth and have better movement speed, which is always handy for melee characters. And the High Elf will let us pick a bonus cantrip, which can have its uses. Just be sure not to really rely on the damage ones, since we don't have a high intellect. The BarDbarian is a pretty solid character, providing you a decent combatant on the front line and a decent support character as well. You can choose to only have a few levels of Barbarian or a few levels of Bard. The choice is yours. Though I would probably recommend picking 4 levels of Barbarian and the rest into Bard, as the Bard will get its own extra attack. You can also have 5 levels of Barbarian too. It's up to you, it's all preference. I myself would prefer to have a higher Bard level, since we're going to get the double attack anyways, but at a much later time, unfortunately. The way I envision it is after you're done shredding on your axe or loot, you'll go ahead and shred your enemies with your axe or loot. And for the last build I bring you today is the Wild Magic Barbarian, which takes your wild magic and gives you a little more wild magic, this time adding the Wild Magic Sorcerer. Let me preface this by saying I don't think this is some kind of hidden gem when it comes to optimization or power. But what I can assure you is how fun this build can be, especially if you like to spice things up with RNG. Whenever you rage, you'll cause a random effect, and whenever you cast a leveled spell, there's a chance wild magic will erupt from you. I played a little bit of the Wild Magic Sorcerer in the early access, and there's a few wild magic effects that can be quite fun and interesting that I have not seen before, such as giving you extra damage on melee attacks, which a Barbarian would love, or, casting a fireball centered on yourself and exploding everything. That's always fun too, even though it's fatal. But there's nothing that a quick reload can't fix, right? As far as the sorcerer spells go, we want to try to avoid spells that require concentration, or really any of the damaging spells too, since we'll be relying mostly on our trusty two-handed weapon. Here's a few spells that you might want to look out for that are Barbarian friendly, since you don't need to worry about your rage. For cantrips, you can pick up Mage Hand, Prestidigitation, Minor Illusion, Friends. You could probably get away with using a blasting cantrip, since cantrips don't cost spell slots and you can cast them as much as you want. And sometimes you can't get to melee, and having a ranged cantrip can help you hit something. For leveled spells, we should look out for spells like Shield, Absorb Elements, and Counter spells for our solid reaction choices before we rage. And other spells we want to pick up that can affect the battle ahead of time will be things like Grease, Jump, Mirror Image, Blink, Fire Shield, Scatter, or Mass Suggestion. Delayed Fire Blast could be a solid choice too. For meta magic options, we would want to take Quicken, Subtle, and Extend spells. Quicken meta magic being your go-to most of the time, since turning most of your actions casts into bonus actions is always nice. And as far as what you do during combat, effectively you'll be making sure to use bolstering magic on yourselves before combat, so that way you're buffed up and can hit more often. On the first turn, we'll try to get into the fray and cast a Quicken Barbarian friendly spell, and attacking with your Great Weapon Master, or just getting to position. The reason we want to do this is mostly because you don't want to waste your movement just trying to get there and wasting your bonus action to not being able to swing at something. And by using a Quicken spell slot, we have a chance to trigger our Wild Surge. On our second turn, you'll rage and get the Rage Wild Surge and continue attacking. The rest of the fight, you'll be swinging your Great Weapon Strikes recklessly to get advantage, and hopefully making the most of some of the random effects you may have created. Alternatively, when a fight starts, you can also just try to cast some blast spells if you had any from a distance, and when enemies get close, rage out and smack them hard. I'm really excited to see some highlights and some footage of people running this build. I think it could be really fun and really funny. I could also see it being very frustrating too, especially in a pivotal moment, and you accidentally exploded the party, and the last save you have is quite a while ago. So just be cautious when you cast stuff. Anyhow, I hope you enjoy these Barbarian builds. Perhaps it helped you decide on what you might want to play in Baldur's Gate 3. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more builds like these. Hopefully I can get a few more of these videos out before the release comes, and I hope to see you in the next one. Farewell for now. Thank you for watching.